Hi folks, welcome to another episode of the Friendly Council, our deck building series, not so new anymore. I think this is going to be something like episode 12 already, and joining me once again is my co-host Hannes. Hello.
Hi Mia, thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure.
And today, for the 12th episode, we have a very special person presenting a deck today, and that person is you, Mia.
Yeah, that's correct. So I have one of my favorite decks today that I really wanted to show on this series, and it's not Baratheon. It's going to
I
be...
was about to ask, yes.
It's
No,
going
not
to be
Baratheon.
a Lannister deck, which is, apart from Baratheon, I think this is the deck I have played the most in the game. I have a bunch of games and I've played it for years with some small changes, but actually it's been sitting in my archives for a while now, so really happy to bring it back and explore some of the new cards that maybe fit in this deck after some new sets have been released in recent times.
Very nice. So it's always cool to see somebody who's maybe not a loyalist, but let's say an enthusiast of one faction to bring a spin on a different faction. So what kind of agenda are you playing Lannister with?
Alright, so we'll be playing the Brotherhood without banners, and I will just click create here so that I can show you the reasoning behind this. So the idea for this deck came about when Forgotten Heroes was released, and you got this lovely cat character, Balerion, with his goofy text, no attachments except cat, right? And the cat attachment that existed at the time was Sir Pounce, and I just absolutely had to make a deck that played Balerion with his cat attachment. And it started as a bit of a joke, but actually I then ended up playing this in one of the online tournaments that was held during the pandemic. There was a charity tournament held, I think it was New Year 2021, and the deck did alright. I made the cut with it, and then I played it again in the Polish Championship that year. And again, it was a pretty big tournament, something like almost 50 players, I think, and made the cut there as well. So started as a joke, but after I've perfected this deck, I think it's pretty viable, right? So it's a pretty serious deck that can do well if you know how to play it.
Really nice. So I think the Brotherhood without banners agenda is really interesting because you can use it in a very versatile kind of decks. And for those who don't know it, you cannot include loyal characters in your deck, but at the beginning of the challenge phase, you kneel your faction card to choose a neutral character you control, and then until the end of the phase, you gain either for that character an insight, intimidate, renown, or stealth. And this choice of keyword is, I think, one of the aspects that makes it so interesting and so flexible. So I'm curious to see how you will use it here in the deck, Mia.
Yeah, so I think all the Brotherhood decks with any faction rely on the character that you choose to participate in more than one challenge, right? Because you want a character with Intimidate to do two challenges, or a character with Renown to do two challenges. So this is the idea basically, right? So we're going to play Sir Pounce, and let's just complete this introduction and include these cards, right? So that you can see what they do. So we're going to play this cat attachment that gives someone the intrigue icon, and then that character does not kneel when declared as an attacker in an intrigue challenge. So that means the character can participate in intrigue challenges and then in another challenge depending on what icons it has. So we're going to choose the character with Sir Pounce attached most of the time and have it gain a useful keyword. Usually that will be Intimidate, right? So if we go first, we can have a character that just participates in all the challenges, and you are stuck as the opponent, right? You either leave it unopposed and then part of your board gets intimidated, or you spend defenders and then the Lannister deck achieves what it wanted to achieve anyway, right? So this is the plan, and Sir Pounce requires unique characters with printed cost 3 or lower, so these will be our targets. And apart from Balerion, we have a character like Angui the Archer, who also, since you cannot control loyal characters in this deck with this agenda, his text will always be active, so he can participate in an intrigue challenge with Sir Pounce attached, then in military because of his ability he doesn't kneel, and then in power as well, so you can potentially get a bunch of characters, a bunch of challenges if Sir Pounce is on the right character. And another reason why we have this agenda with Lannister here is their location. So let's just include Sir Pounce here, forgot to click that. Their location, Casterly Rock. So this allows you to initiate an additional intrigue challenge, which means if you have, for instance, Angui with Sir Pounce and Casterly Rock out, the full set basically, you can just do 2 free intrigue challenges with the same character who doesn't kneel, and that character has a keyword, so if the opponent just lets it go or doesn't defend properly, there is a pretty harsh penalty. So this is the idea, this is the core of the deck, and I wanted to just show you these cards before we go into the actual deck building so that you know what we are trying to do with this.
Yeah, so that makes sense to me. So try to get the extra challenge, kneel as little as possible, and then make best use of the keyword that you have. And if you have initiative, often Intimidate is the best one.
Yes, I would say you choose Intimidate most of the time. Sometimes if the game is about to be decided, of course you go for Renown. And if there is no board, sometimes you get in a situation where the opponent has like a weird deck that doesn't really play on the board much, and there's nothing to intimidate. You can go for Renown, or you can just go for Insight, maybe refill your hand a bit, because those are the decks that usually will go for the long game, right, and try to overturn it at some point. So if you have a full hand, obviously you stand a much better chance in the long game. So we could begin, I think, with the plots here.
All right.
So they are pretty set. I'm pretty happy with this plot deck as a whole. And the opening plot here is going to be the Maiden, because obviously we need to fight for initiative, right? If you want to go first, opening with this, and then all the other plots get +2, and it's just an obvious choice for this deck, and gives us a better chance to get some Intimidate. So that's going to be our opening plot. And then we have a restricted card is going to be Exchange of Information. So Lannister has been left pretty much alone lately with the restricted list. Not much has been restricted, and this is not really a proper Lannister deck anyway that would play a lot of the key Lannister cards. So we don't have any card that we desperately need from the restricted list, and this gives us a chance to get this excellent draw plot going. And we are going to build a draw deck in a way that gives us a chance to draw as many cards as possible here, right? So we're going to include a decent number of attachments and events later, so that we have a good chance of getting 4, or at the very least we should be getting 3 cards when we reveal this plot. And then let's take the Withering Cold. So as you will see when we get into the characters, so for Sir Pounce, the character that has Sir Pounce attached does not kneel to attack in intrigue challenges, and Angui does not kneel for military challenges, and then we have a few others that we're going to include that don't kneel. So the Withering Cold kind of works with all of that. You can get around where all of your characters can attack standing, and you are not spending that many resources that round, but the opponent is really stuck when defending, right? So either they get intimidated, or they defend and their characters are knelt for the following round, and yours could potentially remain standing. So this fits very nicely. And then a little surprise, we're going to play the King in the North. So this is another excellent plot if you can make use of it. So originally, this is the redesigned version. Originally, you needed a queen, or actually, it didn't have the queen text, right? So you needed a king in play, and then you could trigger card abilities, and your opponent could not if they didn't have a king. So it was a bit of an exploit, really. Some factions got such an easy way to get a king in play, and just completely dominated with this plot. So it was, I think, very understandably redesigned into this current version, where it affects everyone. But if you can have a board where there are no real triggers that you need to do, where most of the text is just passive, it works out very nicely. And as you can see, the cards we've already put in. So Casterly Rock doesn't have a triggered ability, Sir Pounce doesn't have a triggered ability, Angui doesn't have a triggered ability, so it all just happens passively, and basically you get away with it and only block your opponent from doing stuff with this.
Good choice, yeah, that makes sense in this kind of deck then.
Alright, and then we have another plot that I really like. So originally, when I played this deck a few years ago, I did not include the Palace of Sorrows. I think I had Supporting the Fate at the time, which was really a good inclusion at the time, because that Lannister Banner of the Kraken Shadows deck was around. That was really annoying, and Burn was played much more than it is now as well. So going into the challenges phase with all the players on 0 gold was gave you some safety that I feel now maybe is not so needed. And I saw other players copying my deck after I played it, and they included the Palace of Sorrow, so I'm just going to steal that idea now and include it here. I think it's an excellent plot for this deck, because if all the characters are strength 3, that means opponent always has to spend one more character on defense than you spend on attack, and it's really difficult to defend challenges, especially if characters are not kneeling to attack. And then yeah, once again we go back to this same line that I keep repeating, right? They're really stuck. Either they defend or they get intimidated. And the intimidate works out nicely as well, because if you win by 3, let's say you attack with 2 characters, opponent defends with 1, it's 6-3, and then all the characters are strength 3, all the characters in play, and anything can be intimidated, so it works out really nicely. And it has 7 initiative, so if you open the Maiden, then in the late game you have a pretty decent chance of going first with this as well. And then we have a reset. This is going to be Duharis. So
sense with many small characters, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So we're going to be looking for small uniques that can take Sir Pounce, and Duharis gives us a decent chance to keep 4 characters. Sometimes you keep 3 if you have 3 costers that you need to carry through, but often you will get let's say 2 characters with 3 cost and 2 characters with cost 2, and you can carry them all through Duharis. And I considered actually the Mad King's Command as an alternative here, because yeah, we don't have that many locations, so it works as a mini political disaster. We have some attachment stacks that play attachments always get out of this pretty nicely, and then you win initiative, you go first, and 3 characters are quite easy to control compared to a wide board. But I feared that maybe, since our characters are pretty small and on their own are not that strong, if I keep Angui and a couple of others, then against a board that plays much bigger, I might struggle. So that's why I never made the switch to Mad King's Command. I think Duharis works out better. And another plot that I included after I originally played this was Close Call. Turns out that most of the deck is unique characters, right? Because that's one of the restrictions on Sir Pounce. You need a unique character to attach it to. And yeah, if decks reset you with Morghulis, for instance, then you are pretty safe with Close Call. You can just get one of the key characters back in out of the dead pile, and you are pretty safe. And this is the plot deck.
I see. So do you also consider opening with Withering Cold instead of Maiden, you know, just to put on the pressure from the start?
Usually it would be the Maiden. The Withering Cold needs, I think, a few of those characters that don't kneel in play. At least one, but preferably 2, right? And Sir Pounce, always nice if you can get him before you play the Withering Cold. Now you may get a Dream opening hand where all of that is in play, and then you could open Withering Cold, I think. But usually I would try to open with the Maiden, and then if there's something I have not found, I would play Exchange of Information, get more cards, and then probably round 3 would be Withering Cold, and then King in the North, those 2 plots, Palace of Sorrows, those 3 that have abilities that affect the board, right? Before I go into the reset, depending on the situation, of course.
Okay, I see. So that's all the plots. And then how do you fill up your characters? Or do you start with something else, with locations or attachments?
We can go into the characters. So usually when I build decks, I go from the higher cost to the lower cost, and this time it's going to be pretty quick to go through the high cost characters, because as you can see in the plot deck, right, we don't have any dedicated economy plot. It's all going to be pretty low cost curves, so we're just going to include a bunch of chads. Now economy is not that bad, most of the plots have 5 gold, right, but we're not going to be playing any 7 costers here, because it's a bit expensive to marshal them. So so one thing, let's if I select cost 7 here, one thing that you may notice if you deck build with the Brotherhood without banners, usually Thrones DB is pretty good, right? It's going to filter out any characters that are not legal for your deck. But since this agenda allows you to include some loyal cards but not loyal characters, it doesn't actually filter out the loyal characters. So you have Cersei here available. She would be great, right? Because she doesn't kneel, and she with Casterly Rock she's great, but unfortunately can't play her. So you can set your own filter here to filter out those loyal characters like this, and you will see that we are not going to be playing any 7 costers, but for cost 6 there is one, right, in Lannister that doesn't kneel, and that's Sir Jaime. So not great with the Harrys, but apart from that, he is a great character. He doesn't kneel in one of the challenges, so works brilliantly with the Withering Cold, and also nothing triggered here, so for King in the North is pretty nice. So he's really the only high cost character that we are going to play here. 3 copies, and I've tried a copy of Lady Stoneheart as well in most versions of this deck, so she is a bit awkward, sometimes does nothing, but there are some situations, right, where the opponent has loyal characters, and not that many, just some key loyal characters, and then they're stuck because they have to kill something they don't want to kill, like Robert Baratheon or something like that. And I think she can potentially win games on her own, but not worth playing multiple copies here, so I just have one just in case the situation presents itself.
But I mean, you also have Brotherhood characters in your deck, so you can also resurrect her relatively cheaply, right?
Okay, let's have a look what has the Brotherhood trait. Yeah, so Angui has the trait, so you need to discard power from him, which can happen. He can gain power, right? So it is possible. But to be honest, I've never done that. I've never had her killed so that she would come back from the death pile, but it is possible, right?
Okay.
And then let's see, so we have nothing for cost 5, I think. Oh, actually for cost 5 we can have a look at some neutrals, right? So I've considered a few in the past. So we have Lyn Corbray, who is an interesting character because he stands himself, and in any deck that plays the Withering Cold, this reaction to stand himself is pretty decent, and I've tried it, but in the end the deck space is tight, so he had to go. But there are a couple of others here actually that I forgot. So we have Aramir Sixskins. We're going to include a copy of him. He has the same reaction window as the agenda, and you can see what you are missing in case you need to push one of the challenges through. He can take Sir Pounce, so usually I would not choose him with the agenda, but he helps if you can put him in the same challenge if you're missing some strength, or if you want to choose something other than Intimidate, you can choose the last option here and have him Intimidate instead. So pretty versatile. And Sirio Forel as well. So he is great when he's actually in play, but a bit expensive, so we're going to take 1 copy here as well. Most characters would have a military icon already, those that usually are targets for Sir Pounce, but stealth is nice, and if Myrcella is in play, we're going to get to her shortly. She is one that benefits, I think, the most from a military icon, because she is one of those non-kneelers that you want to have participate in all the challenges that you can. So that's all that we have for high cost characters, nothing cost 4, and then we come to this cost 3, which is where the key part of the deck starts. We're going to be looking for characters that can take Sir Pounce. So we have Angui, and my second favorite choice for Sir Pounce is Lemon Cloak. Now he only has 1 icon, but really he has 2, right? Because his text is, unless he's milled, he's always going to be active here. Can't have any loyal characters, and he gets +2 strength, so he has a good ratio. He has 4 strength, and you can get him an intrigue icon, and he participates in 3 challenges with that, so he works out pretty nicely. And then we are going to play another character with 3 copies, Ghost of High Heart. Now, not a great target for Sir Pounce. Against Hidden Pinch you could, but already has an intrigue icon, so but it will boost all of your board because there's no loyal characters, so everyone gets +1. At the time when this deck was created, originally Burn was much more present, so that +1 strength also could be key. Now, not to that extent, but still pretty good, right? In a deck where you want to intimidate, having higher strength is always nice, so we're going to take 3 copies. Now usually I would put Ghost of High Heart into an intrigue challenge to help push it through for a bigger intimidate, but against some decks you really need to know the hand, right? I keep mentioning Burn, so if you're playing against Burn, just have a look right at the start of the challenges phase, see exactly what the threat is, and maybe even get rid of that Dracarys or Consuming Flames or whatever it is that could potentially burn your Angui. So against some decks you will have a look. And then we're going to have Myrcella. Now she cannot get the keyword from the agenda, unfortunately. She's not neutral, but she works excellently with the rest of the deck. You can, once you get more cards, no, that's not guaranteed, but if you can get more cards in hand than the opponent, she just goes into the same challenge as the character with Sir Pounce, and it's not going to be just 2 or 3 strength, it's just going to be 6, and then opponent has a really tough job, needs to fully oppose or anything, basically can get intimidated, and it's really difficult to win on defense. So we're going to take 3 copies of her. And so the Lannister guys, we're not taking many of them because we want the agenda to work on as many characters as possible, so we prefer neutrals, but I do like Shay, again, Withering Cold, right? So if you have her, she just stands, and then can stand herself when the Withering Cold is done, so stands herself next round, and just very efficient, and also you can get her to participate in multiple challenges, so we'll have a copy of her. And do we have any other Lannister characters? We do. We have the Hound. Now, he is just very efficient, so we're not going to try to do any huge tricks with him, no flea bottom or anything like that. He just brings in a bunch of strength, and the ambush here is useful. So if you're not playing against a deck that is likely to play First Snow, I don't usually even bother with ambush, right? It's just cheaper to play him for 3 golds. If you have just too much gold, you can always wait and have him as a surprise, but against First Snow is where he is the most crucial, because this deck with all the 3 cost and all the 2 cost characters sometimes can get stuck against First Snow, just lose most of the board, and having something in hand that can come in is quite useful, so that's why I'm taking 2 copies here.
Yeah, he's just too good to be left out of almost any Lanny deck, right?
Yes, exactly. I was looking at Gunter as well because of his ambush. Actually, with a different agenda, he could be a good guy for Sir Pounce as well, because he works on all the challenges. So if you can get him in, let's say, 3 challenges, if you have Casterly rock out and trigger his reaction multiple times, it's really nice. But since he's not a good target for Sir Pounce here, wouldn't be a top choice. We're not going to play him. Instead, we are going to have some more neutrals here. So we have a copy of Kindly Man. Ability doesn't do much. So when he stands, you just well, if there's something to discard, you can do that, right? If there's some kind of vengeance token or whatever, Valar Morghulis token somewhere, you can discard it. But I think the only thing that works with this deck is Lady Stoneheart. So just randomly put a Kiss token somewhere if you stand Kindly Man on one of the characters that will stay in play. Apart from that, he's another character that comes in potentially from hand or shadows to get around for snow, which is pretty nice. And he has all 3 icons, so he can contribute to any challenge, and potentially can take Sir Pounce if you find nothing else. So just pretty efficient there. And then I think for this 3 cost, I've been looking at the new character, former champion, and yeah, too soon to tell. I've played a few games and kind of like him. So he has that same vibe as Poor Fellows, right? Where it's just a cheap renown, and if you get him early, just speeds you up and forces the opponent to do something, right? To get that reset as soon as possible, or yeah, to try to block. And he is starts pretty efficiently with his cost to strength ratio, so difficult to defend military against him. And then if you can win 2 challenges to get 2 renown, he gets that power icon in stealth, which is also nice. And one trick I've discovered is that with at the Palace of Sorrows, it sets everyone to 3, so even if he doesn't have 2 power on him, he becomes 3, and then suddenly he is yeah, just a fairly cheap military and power icon that has stealth and renown, which works out pretty nicely. So I've been trying 2 copies of him, and I think if you draw both, for instance, quite early and don't want to wait to get that second icon, I think that's when you probably reveal an early Palace of Sorrows and just get him to work for that round. Difficult to get him to strength 1, right? You would need to win 4 challenges. I've not really been able to do that. I don't think anyone is counting on that, but 3 strength is quite realistic, I think. And then your favorite card as well. To complete cost 3, we have some Begging Brothers, right?
Yeah, very nice. They have to be in there.
Yeah, so they can be, you can trigger the agenda on them if they're the only neutral character. Apart from that, doesn't really matter that you're playing Brotherhood, but still worth including, I think, just for the cancel. And I think that's it for cost 3. We can come back to it if we've forgotten anything, but I think we can go to cost 2. So for cost 1, we have nothing. No uniques here. That would be it's just Jingle Bell. It's not going to take Sir Pounce, and we're not going to take Lannisport Merchant because there's nothing to reduce, and we're not going to take Galton Merchant because there's no city plot. So all of that doesn't really work out. So we're skipping the cost 1s, and we have some cost 2. We have a copy of Tommen. Now that's it's a questionable include, right? But they are his cats, so I would feel a bit guilty not including Tommen. Sometimes when you really go aggressively with intrigue and opponent has no draw, you can get their hand to 0, and then they struggle with gaining any power. You can leave challenges unopposed and it doesn't cost you. And I've had a game just recently where he got the other cat, not Sir Pounce, but Lady Whiskers, which specifically names him, right, gives him stealth, and allowed me to push some power challenges through, which was pretty nice. So I think a copy of him is fair enough. And we've already talked about Balerion. So this is at the time when I played this originally, as I said, Burn was much more present, and he was a pretty safe choice. Not the first choice for Sir Pounce, because Angui just works out better, but if you're playing against Burn, since he cannot be killed, you can just put Sir Pounce on him, and he does his challenges, and you don't need to worry. And I've still kept all 3 copies here. It's questionable, maybe should go down, but with his ambush as well, it's another character that can come in after first snow. And since Sir Pounce, the attachment has ambush as well, you can you're not going to get the agenda trigger on him, but you can, for instance, just ambush him, immediately put Sir Pounce, and you can have a decent round even against first snow, which without him you might not have had. So we are keeping all 3 copies.
Okay, yeah, no, interesting. I might be the first deck that I see with 3 copies of Balerion in it. I like it.
Yeah, you can get dupe stuck in hand, right? No reason to dupe him, since he cannot be killed unless he gets nightmares or something. Yeah, we're keeping him. And we'll play some gold mines as well. So in case you overdraw him and have more than one, you can trade him for something else, which is something that Lannister can always do very nicely with that particular location.
You need the dupes against Varus.
That's correct, yeah, you do need dupes against discard effects. And his ability, do we use that ever? Honestly, not so much, but the other day when I was testing this a little bit to see if it still worked, I did run up against, I think it was some kind of Lannister Free Companies deck. Not sure if it was Free Companies, but it used those Lannister tricks with Casterly Rock and Iron Bank, I think, and yeah, just such a tempo hit for them if you take 1 gold off the Iron Bank before it triggers, right? So let's say they have 2 gold on it, and then you take 1 in the draw phase, and yeah, just gets them up to 2 again instead of up to 4 for the Iron Bank, and it's worth it, I think. And there may be other bestow that you come up against just in normal games. What else? We have a copy of Sweet Robin. So I've been thinking about Sweet Robin. Now, what do you think, Hannes? Would he be good at 3 copies maybe? He has a much needed power icon, and he could take Sir Pounce, right? But only strength 1, so I'm a bit unsure about this plan.
If you are already unsure with Tommen, then I don't see really a reason that Sweet Robin should go in more than once. He has the extra ability. It can sometimes block important things like Hollow Hill for the opponent. But that would be something to test if it's worth it. I think 1 copy sounds okay to me.
Yeah, I think so too. That's been my starting point, and I guess we'll see when we play more games if he's worth including a bit more. So his ability actually is surprisingly useful, can really mess up some stuff. Earlier today I played against Old Town, and yeah, and I think Mark Mollendorf was in play as well, and suddenly he was quite an obstacle, right, for my opponent to overcome, so he can really ruin some plans. Alright, and then what else do we have? We have a copy of Old Bill Bone, which is very nice against decks that need their faction card nil, so some agendas need that, and with Withering Cold, if you can draw him, he blocks the faction card for 2 rounds, which is very nice, so I think well worth it. And again, another character that if you do get that first snow, which is an annoying counter to this deck, he can come into play. And the last one that we have a copy of Citadel Archivist. I used to play more of these just in case, for instance, suddenly your most of your copies of Sir Pounce found themselves in the discard pile or something like that, and you needed that reshuffle. But it's not been doing that great for me lately, so I've gone down to 1 copy. And you do always have that option if you have Gold Mine and you draw this guy, and if it's some kind of deck that plays with the discard pile, like Targaryen Mercenaries team, or some Greyjoy decks really take stuff out of your discard pile and you need to get rid of it. And he can save some games with that, and if you need the reshuffle you can do that. But often you would just marshal him, right, for the power icon, which is in Lannister usually a weakness in these little neutral characters, not that rich in power icons either, right? So we need all that we can find. And that's what we have for characters.
Nice. So many small but versatile characters. As you already mentioned, this makes the deck susceptible to strong attack from first snow of winter, probably one of the most dangerous plots, together with Valar Morghulis. But you can also bring some of them back in with ambush, and you can of course repopulate the board relatively cheaply compared to other deck types, right?
Yes, exactly. The other counter, apart from First Snow, would be Bolton Flare. He's really annoying because all the characters are so cheap that... sorry, not Roose Bolton, Bolton Flare. That it can target almost anything, right? And then if you have a duped Angui with Sir Pounce and this guy comes in, just really awkward, and he triggers his fort, so triggers on King in the North as well. So you really need some milk, some Bagging Brothers when he is in play. Or sometimes, now this happened by accident once, and I discovered this little trick. If you only have the 3-costers and you have Balerion as your only 2-cost character, he blocks Bolton Flare completely, because he himself cannot be killed, and then opponent cannot choose anything higher. So if you somehow get Sir Pounce or the 3-cost character that you have, which you could with, for instance, Lemon Cloak, and then you have Myrcella and some other 3-costers and maybe Jaime, it's a pretty decent board, even without your 2-cost characters, if you just have Balerion to blank that Bolton Flare.
Okay, so then for attachments, of course you have Sir Pounce, and you also already mentioned Lady Whiskers. Does she also, like, do they both go in 3 times, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, so let's be honest, Sir Pounce is a bit overpowered, right? Gives an intrigue icon and non-kneeling ability, which is just a bit much compared to, for instance, Appointed or Little Bird, which also give an intrigue icon. Okay, the targeting restrictions are a bit stricter here, needs a unique 3-coster, but just such value, and the other one, Lady Whiskers, is not that great. It just has non-kneeling ability on the power challenge, but doesn't actually give the power icon, so it's much worse, but it is still worth it, I think. You can still get an Intimidate on 2 challenges with a character. If you put this on, let's say, Lemon Cloak with 4 strength, do power first, then do military, it's still a pretty decent effect and still a pretty big obstacle for the opponent. So I do have a copy of Lady Whiskers, but I don't think you would play more than that. But we do need some other attachments. So with exchange of information, I think, so there are 2 strategies here, right? Some decks really try to make sure they get as many cards as possible. I remember back in the day, Targburn used to play 2 times exchange of information just to get as many cards in hand as possible, because Consuming Flames wanted you to discard 1, and Incinerate worked really nicely if you could discard a few cards from your hand. And they didn't care that much what you got. The burn events, for instance, are just pretty much interchangeable. Whatever you get, it's pretty nice. And the other extreme I've seen was, for instance, some Martell decks would only play Secret Schemes 3 copies as their only event. So, okay, there's a good chance that you might not see it in the top 10 cards with exchange, but if you do see it, the opponent has to give you Secret Schemes. There's no choice. Has to give you the very best card that you have. So, what do you do? What's the perfect number, you think, Hannes, for attachments with in combination with exchange of information?
Yeah, so if it's not an attachment focused deck, yeah, you should be careful and not overdoing it just for this plot, especially if you play it only once. And I'd say, I don't know, somewhere 4 at least, and don't go over 8, and somewhere in between is probably the sweet spot.
Yes, I would agree completely. So we're going to have 6 attachments and 6 events, and the strategy here is between those 2 strategies that I mentioned, right? So we want to get 4 cards, or at least 3, but preferably 4. But we also want to get the opponent in a situation where there's no bad cards to give us, right? So we're not going to include just a copy of Widow's Wail. Okay, it's nice, we can put it on Angui and he has more strength, but we want Serpounce, so we don't want too many attachments so that our opponent has a chance not to give us Serpounce. So we're just going to take 6, and the 2 I have are Milk of the Poppy. I'd like to play 3, but okay, have to include that Lady Whiskers. I think 2 are pretty decent. In some games it's not going to help you. In other games it saves the game. So I think with 2 Bragging Brothers in the deck as well, and King in the North, I think 2 Milks are pretty decent.
Okay. So, and then what do you do for locations except Casterly Rock that you mentioned at the beginning? Is there anything else functional, or is the rest basically economy?
Okay, so let's have a look at locations. We have one other. We have the Hollow Hill. I think in any deck that plays all non-loyals, you kind of have to include that. And we're going to have 2 copies. Here we go. So 2 copies of the Hollow Hill. It's a bit of a hit, right? You need to pay for it, and we don't have that much gold in our plots. So sometimes you will have a good game, you will have good exchange of information, you will have plenty of characters, and you won't take the hit and you will keep it in your hand. But other times, if it looks like you might be struggling or the game will go long, just get it in play and yeah, search top 10, you're bound to find something useful. It's a very nice card. And the rest, as you said, is going to be economy here. So how do we build economy? This is one of the decks where I'm not entirely happy with what we have. So there's no perfect choice, because let's say if you are a new player, right, you just bought the core set and you're building a Lannister deck, you have 3 economy cards that you're going to put in. So you have this Western Fiefdom, you have King's Road, and you have Rose Road, and you're just going to put all of them in, and no choice to be made, right? But these cards don't do the same thing if you look at them closely. So you have cards that give you better tempo. So for instance, King's Road, when you play it, you immediately use it and you get +2 gold from that, and sounds better than Rose Road. But then if the game goes long, Rose Road is better value, right? Because it's in 3 rounds it's going to give you more gold than the King's Road does. So usually you would have, when you build a deck, you would go into one extreme rather than the other. But here we have a couple of obstacles that we need to overcome that are basically self-inflicted, right? So we have the Withering Cold. So any economy that kneels, it's going to stay knelt for an additional round. And we have the King in the North. So any economy that triggers is not going to trigger that round. So here is where we are a bit stuck, and there is no perfect solution. But I think we are looking for tempo more than we are looking for those locations that help in the long game. So we're going to take 2 copies of King's Road. Usually you might not want to spend it on something cheap, right? So you could spend it on Myrcella or Lemon Cloak, and if you're struggling with econ, you might. But I think if you wait for Jaime, that seems like the thing to do, right? Because the plots themselves make it very difficult to pay for him because it's all 5 gold and he's a bit costly. And then we're not going to take Western Fiefdom, but we're going to take the equivalent card for neutrals. We're going to take Ocean Road, which can reduce most cards in this deck. And here is where we're going to take 3 copies. So here's the thing, right? When people play against the Withering Cold, I've noticed they automatically nil their economy without thinking, and then sometimes they will carry a few gold into the challenges phase and do nothing with it, and it gets wasted. So you need to know when you are playing the Withering Cold that locations will stay knelt, and just calculate from the start of the marshalling phase, right? If you can get by without kneeling it, you keep it for next round, and if you need it, you kneel it, but it will stay knelt through Withering Cold, so that's something that you just have to accept. And we're going to take Rose Roads. Even though we're sometimes not going too long, we are pretty rushy here. I think still 0 cost, great with setups. You can it provides gold without triggering, so that's still a pretty strong economy card, I think, that fits anywhere. And the last one, Gold Mines. Same thing as Hollow Hill. Sometimes 2 gold that doesn't immediately get you any your investment back is a tempo hit, but yeah, sometimes you can afford it. It's non-limited, so you can get it in setup with another limited card, or early on with another limited card, and the ability can be useful. Helps you dig through your deck, get rid of anything that's died that's in the dead pile, or if you have an additional copy of Serpounce that you're doing nothing with or something like that, you can just use the Gold Mine, and okay, it stays knelt for the Withering Cold, that's not a big deal. But King in the North does block it, so here's where you need to take care. If you want to reveal the King in the North next round, you double use, I think, Gold Mine the previous round. If you have something to discard, you just do it in the standing phase, because next round you will not be allowed to trigger it. And that's the economy. I've considered Gates of the Moon as well. So back in the day you could play at the gates, and we didn't really have any use for Galtown in this deck, and Great Hall, even though most characters are unique, there's nothing high cost really apart from Jamie, and those plots that I mentioned block Great Hall, so didn't seem worth it. But I did used to play at the gates into Gates of the Moon, but I don't think it's needed. We are pretty good with, we have so many low cost characters that usually even if we get screwed with economy, it's not that big of a deal, and don't really want to give the opponent the help, right? So we're putting pressure on them early on with Intimidate, trying to get some cards discarded from their hand and get them in an awkward spot, and I don't want to give them any help to get a bigger board than they would normally at the start of the game.
Okay, so that leaves us with events. What events are you playing here? Because there could be a very broad choice that would fit the deck type, right?
Yeah, so this is probably the card type where I've swapped the most cards. I've tried a bunch of different cards throughout the years, I could say now, of playing this deck. And I'm still not entirely convinced that my choice is the correct one, but I do have Florian and Jonquil, which works, I think, very nicely with the general strategy, because it gives renown and it targets the same characters as Serpounce, which are the core of our deck. And I've been trying for a long time to find some kind of trick to give Myrcella renown, and just didn't exist before. This is what, Brand the Builder, before Brand the Builder was released. And now, yeah, you can play this on Myrcella to have her participate in 3 challenges with renown, or you can play it on the character that has Serpounce attached if you find that first, and it really speeds you up, I think, if you can get some renown and don't need to spend the agenda for it. And along the same lines we have Quiet as a Shadow. So this is a card that not many will really know. It's not seen much play, but again, that same restriction, right? Unique character with printed cost 3 or lower. So just a cheap way, free way actually, to give someone stealth. So you could, if you have a character with surpounds, you can really make like a Voltron character out of that. Have him participate in 3 challenges. In theory, if it's Ango, you could do even 4 if you have the full set of cards. You can get 1 keyword from the agenda, you can get a keyword from this, you can get a keyword from Florian and Jonquil, maybe even from Sirio. So I think this fits very nicely. And back in the day when I played Supporting the Fate, it was nice to have events at 0 cost that you could still play that round. Now that's not a consideration, but I still kept 2 copies here, and it's useful. So we can give that a try. And the other one, so let's first discuss some that I have not included. So the Hand's Judgment I had originally, again, it's a meta call, right? If burn is annoying or just in general event heavy decks, you might want to play this, but at the moment I've taken the risk and taken it out. And the same with Nightmares, it's a very useful good stuff card that you could play depending on the situation. We have Begging Brothers, we have King in the North, so taking the risk that we might not need it. And the other one I've considered is the new one. I've tried it for a few games this week. The Lannister event 1 to 3, which is so the first 2 options don't really apply, right? So we're not going to return anything to our hand or place in shadows. I guess Old Bill Bone is one and only real target that you would want to get in and out of shadows again. It's the third option. So we have potentially a non-kneeler that can do 3 challenges. So if you can get Insight, you can grab some cards from that, the same as you would if you use the agenda. However, I found that, okay, character does 3 challenges, but usually doesn't win all 3. So opponent will maybe defend 1, right, and then run out of board and let the others through, and suddenly 1 for 2 is not such a good trade anymore, and I don't think it's worth it. I tried it, it's decent, but I don't think it's worth it at the moment. So it's not made the final cut. I think if you played Big Cersei, maybe that's a better way, because she tends to win at least, right? It's quite difficult to oppose her.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the last one we have is Lay Waste. Again, meta call, sometimes stuck in your hand, nothing to do. Other times it saves games, gets rid of the Iron Bank that is about to fill up, or some kind of negative attachment. And lately, so we just had the release of the Spoils of War, and there are some worries I've heard today that the Crag is really strong and gains power really quickly, so maybe that's going to be useful against that location, and against something like Corpse Lake that gains power on it can prove quite useful. So meta call, but going with 2 copies. So generally my advice with exchange of information would be to get 6 events, whatever you choose, and then the exact choices would be, I think, depending on what you are likely to face, and just maybe some personal preference here. I don't think there is an obvious correct choice here.
Yeah. All right, so that's the deck, right?
I think so. We are at 60 cards. Okay, so if you want my opinion on that question that you always ask, I don't think it should always be 60. I can survive with 61, but I don't think there is anything here that is missing. So I think this is what we have. I would not include anything else.
Okay, super cool. So the other thing I always ask is basically, what are you good against and where do you struggle?
Right, so specific decks, we could have a pretty long discussion, right? But let's discuss specific types instead. So anything that plays First Snow, really annoying because of the low cost curve. And those bolt-on flares I've already mentioned, so anything that targets chards like that is awkward. And anything with negative attachments, so for instance, if you're playing against Martel and suddenly your Voltron character with Sir Pounce gets a Secret Pact or something like that, that's a real killer, right? Or a Craven, for instance. So anything like that is pretty awkward to play against. And some decks just have such a wall of defense that it's difficult to break through. I've struggled against the wall, so Nightwatch wall defense decks in the past are quite difficult to defeat, I think. What else is difficult? So anything that can play without a board for you to intimidate. So you play against an empty board and then suddenly Tyrell Lion gets a Knight of Flowers out of Shadows or something like that is really awkward to overcome, I think.
What about, so I was thinking, what about those super strong board presence decks, be it Night's Watch, maybe with all the stewards that can dominate the intrigue challenges, or I don't know, Martel, where you have the whole family of Martel boosted through Doran, and they just scoff slightly when they see your 3 strength Engai trying to win a challenge.
Yeah, so if you let them get really big so that you can't push the challenges through, obviously you're going to struggle, right? So usually those decks take a while to get going, and anything that is slow, that takes its time, is under pressure, I think. So you start with a character that does multiple challenges, you get the hand, you get the board, get some unopposed challenges, and if you can force them into an early reset, that's basically your job done. And any decks that go really big, of course, you have the Harris to counter that, and any decks that go high on triggers, you have the King in the North, and that's also one of your solutions to those decks that play without a board, right? So if you start well and then you see that your opponent has basically sacrificed the first few rounds, just put stuff into Shadows or something like that, and then you play King in the North and their Robert Strong from Shadows doesn't trigger anymore, or their Heron Hall to put a Clansman in doesn't trigger, then that's usually when you have a pretty good round.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Yeah, and is there, I mean, I got the general strategy, but what do you do if the other opponent always goes first, classical Greyjoy decks? Can you still get your game plan through?
Yeah, that's tough, right? When they fight you for initiative, that's not something you want usually. So we have, what do we have here? So we have Palace of Sorrows is pretty big, Withering Cold is pretty big. But if the opponent has a bunch of modifiers and then they play March to the Wall in their plot deck and Forced March and stuff like that, and you lose initiative, that can be a struggle. Now, it depends, of course, what the opponent is trying to do with that. So if it's some kind of aggressive deck that is just going to kill off your board, then you might struggle. But if the opponent just does their challenges and doesn't do a lot of damage, and you still have your standing character with Sir Pounce to do challenges back, and the opponent has spent their board and can't really defend, then you still have half a chance, right, to play against that. The other thing that I think we should mention, so if the opponent goes really fast, if they ignore you and your Sir Pounce non-kneeling strategies, for instance, the Star Crossing deck, I played this I think twice in the Friendly Open final event, the one that decides the champion, right, at the end of the season. And I think twice I've run up against Star Crossing, and just matches you for speed, and I think it's faster. Just ignores what you are doing. You're trying to intimidate, but okay, it doesn't work because they have 7 characters in play. And if you choose Renown, you get some Renown, and then they play I Am No One on their guy and do 3 challenges and crossing, and it's pretty fast, and I think that's where you might struggle. So I think it's better against decks that start slowly, that starts with a questionable board, and against decks that don't go too wide, right? Because then Intimidate hits harder. And you have at the Palace of Sorrows as well, which is a new inclusion, but I really like it. So that's where the numbers start to matter. So you have all the small guys, you have half a chance to have more characters than your opponent if they're going big with, let's say, Greyjoy bigs or something like that. And yeah, then the plot equalizes, right? Every character is on the same level, and yours have a bunch of keywords and potentially can participate in more challenges than your opponent's characters can.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then I have a very specific question about a plot that I really like, but also rarely play, to be honest. And that is coordinated attack. That sounds like something that would fit in the general strategy of the deck, has high initiative, and it would allow you to do another challenge that round. Is it something you would consider?
To be honest, I had to read it right now because I don't know from head what that does exactly. Yeah, I have not considered this, but yeah, so high initiative and yeah, anything that lets you do another challenge is useful. The question is, can you play it with 3 gold? Because we have exchange that has low gold, and then I wouldn't like to risk any or many other plots that have low gold, because if you have not, it's a win more in that way, right? Because if you have not established a board that can do damage, then with 3 gold you might not manage to do that round either. And if you have, then it's yeah, it does more damage than you would with other plots, but it is a bit win more in that way. But I can imagine that it would win games. But not sure what to swap out, really. I think I'm pretty happy with my plot deck. Has answers to most problems.
Okay. All right. So I think I've got the feeling for the deck. It looks really cool. So to put on some pressure on my opponents, it would be really nice for me to try it out, because I'm always more of, comeback decks and longer decks. So this will be an interesting addition to have. So thanks a lot for explaining it and presenting it, Miha. That was really great.
Yeah, absolutely, my pleasure. I hope the viewers will enjoy this episode. I think it's a deck that not sure if it's easy to play for new players, but it is a good way to learn the game, I think, because a lot of the deck depends on how you approach the challenges phase, right? So the exact order in which you do challenges, so that you do the most damage with your keywords and stuff like that. So I think it has some tricks, but in other ways it plays really to the core mechanics of the game, which is just doing challenges. And I hope that whoever is learning the game might find this one useful.
Excellent. So thank you for hosting, thank you for presenting, and thanks to everyone for listening. And see you in the next episode of the Friendly Council.